Most people think Tim Cook just inherited a finished masterpiece. Steve Jobs built Apple. Cook only had to hold the wheel. Sounds fair? Except it's almost the opposite of the truth. When Cook joined in 1998, Apple was weeks from bankruptcy. When Jobs handed him the keys in 2011 and died 6 weeks later, nearly every analyst predicted decline. Instead, the man they dismissed as just the operations guy turned a $350 billion company into the first one ever worth $4 trillion. But the real story isn't how he grew Apple. It's the one thing he refused to do. To everyone who worked with him, Tim Cook was the last person you'd expect to lead a revolution. He didn't shout. He didn't pitch wild visions. He was the quiet engineer from Robertsdale, Alabama, a small town where his father worked the shipyards, and dinner conversations were about getting by, not changing the world. He studied industrial engineering at Auburn, earned an MBA from Duke, and spent 12 years at IBM mastering something most people find painfully boring: how to move products from a factory to a customer without wasting a single dollar or a single day. By the late 1990s, he was a rising operations executive at Compaq, then the biggest PC seller on earth. Stable salary, clear future. The kind of career your parents pray you'll have. He was, by every outside measure, a man who had already won. Comfortable, predictable, safe. And that's exactly why what he did next made no sense to anyone who knew him. You'd be a fool to leave Compaq for Apple. That's what one CEO told him point blank in 1998. And on paper, he was right. Apple was hemorrhaging cash, drowning in unsold inventory, and most experts gave it months, not years, to survive. Cook had a corner office at the world's biggest PC company. Walking away from that for a dying computer maker wasn't bold. It was career suicide. He did it anyway. He later called it the chance of a lifetime. But in that moment, it was a 37-year-old man betting his entire reputation on a company the whole industry had already written off. Then came the work no one makes movies about. Cook tore Apple's broken supply chain apart and rebuilt it from scratch. He shut down factories, outsourced manufacturing, and cut the time products sat in warehouses from months down to mere days. He called excess inventory fundamentally evil. It wasn't glamorous. It quietly saved the company. But here's what almost no one saw coming. For 13 years, Cook lived in Steve Jobs' shadow, the reliable operator, the numbers man, the guy who kept the trains running while the genius got the magazine covers. And then, the shadow disappeared. In August 2011, a dying Steve Jobs resigned and handed Cook the most scrutinized job in business. 6 weeks later, Jobs was gone. The grief was real. But the world barely paused to mourn before asking the brutal question out loud: without Jobs, was Apple already finished? Headlines openly doubted him. Competitors smelled blood. The expectation wasn't that Cook would fail loudly. It was that he'd preside over a slow, dignified decline. 15 years later, he'd make one final decision that stunned everyone. But to understand why it mattered, you first have to see what he did with a company the world had already started writing the obituary for. So Cook did the one thing no one expected. He stopped trying to be Steve Jobs. It sounds simple. It wasn't. Every instinct, every headline, every nervous shareholder wanted him to channel Jobs. The showmanship, the reality distortion field, the mercurial genius. Imitating a legend would have been the safe move. And it would have destroyed him, because there was only ever one Steve Jobs. Instead, Cook leaned into exactly what made him different. He wasn't a product visionary, so he built the greatest operational machine in corporate history around the visionaries he hired. He couldn't out-charisma Jobs, so he led with steadiness, discipline, and a quiet moral spine. In 2014, he did something Jobs never had to. He came out publicly as gay, the first openly gay CEO of a Fortune 500 company, saying he'd give up his own privacy if it helped even one kid feel less alone. He didn't replace Steve Jobs. He refused to. And that refusal, the decision to lead as himself instead of a copy of someone else, is the hinge the entire next decade turned on. It didn't feel triumphant in the moment. It felt like a man quietly deciding he'd rather fail as himself than win as an imitation. What happened next rewrote the record books. Under Cook, the iPhone became the most profitable product on the planet. He turned Apple's services, the App Store, iCloud, Apple Music, into a business bigger than most Fortune 500 companies on their own. He pushed the Apple Watch and AirPods into entire new categories and bet billions designing Apple's own silicon chips when the whole industry said it couldn't be done. Then the numbers stopped sounding real. In 2018, Apple became the first company in history worth $1 trillion. $2 trillion by 2020, $3 trillion by 2022. And in October 2025, it crossed $4 trillion, worth more than the entire economies of most countries on Earth. Annual revenue climbed past $400 billion. If you want the full story of the soft-spoken engineer Cook chose to hand all of this to, the successor almost no one outside Apple knows, comment next below, and I'll make that the next video. The operations guy they laughed at didn't just keep Apple alive. He made it the most valuable company human beings have ever built. And he did it without ever once pretending to be the man he replaced. And that brings us to the decision that stunned everyone. In 2026, at the absolute peak, a $4 trillion company, the most successful run any CEO has ever had, Tim Cook announced he would step down. Not pushed out, not failing. Walking away on his own terms, handing the company to a successor he'd spent years preparing. The man who once joined a company everyone swore was dying chose to leave one at the height of its powers. That's the inheritance he leaves behind. Not just a $4 trillion machine, but proof that you don't have to be the loudest person in the room to change the world. That being underestimated can be a weapon. That the bravest thing isn't imitating a genius. It's having the nerve to be fully, unmistakably yourself. If a story like this is why you're here, there are plenty more waiting on Rise from Zero. He was never the next Steve Jobs. He was the first Tim Cook,